got to give subcontractors, particularly on something that's complicated, 4 weeks.
There's always that excuse in our industry, isn't there? Yeah, every project's different. It's fragmented. No project's the same. It's not true.
What technology won't replace is some of the human elements that we need to do. So that site visit.
And I said, that in itself is a problem. Main contractors or any procuring business, we're leaving loads of money on the table, aren't we? Hello and welcome to episode 178 of the Own the Build podcast with me, Paul Hemming. Today, we missed it once, we're not going to miss it twice. We're returning to the Future of Contracting series today. As you know, for all of the Future of Contracting episodes, I welcome my good mate, Christopher Barber, into the studio, QS turned Chief Visionary Officer at C-Link. Chris, where have you been all of my life, mate?
Just been waiting to come on to an episode so we can mention it's coming home.
Definitely a bit late for that, isn't it?
This could age real badly.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to come home, but we won't go there. So, today, we're going to talk about tendering. Shock horror. We're going to talk about it again, right? But
everyone strap in.
Yeah, exactly. It's another one of those interesting episodes where we talk about tendering. But I know for a fact, just this week, a QS reached out to me and said, I can't remember what the episode was, he said, that episode was so geeky and so nerdy about quantity surveying. I absolutely loved it. So there you go. People do want to talk about it as much as we do, right? All jokes aside, we have talked in the past about digital supply chains, digital pre-qualification, digital contracts, and digital signatures on contracts. So DocuSign or e-signatures, let's call it. What we never talked about was the bit in between, right? And I don't know why we did it in that order, but that's what we did. And that is digital tendering. So the process of you have your supply chain and PQQ in place all the way through to now you've got them with a lovely e-signature. Before we talk about digital tendering, what I'd like to discuss with you in the first half of today's show is best practice in tendering as it is today, right? So let's imagine that we're procuring a package. What package would you like to procure with me today, Chris?
I've pretty much procured all of them. So I don't know, something that will resonate with most. Dry lining, let's say.
All right, let's do dry lining. So I've never procured a dry lining package, actually. So the closest I ever got was on Battersea Power Station procuring an acoustic ceiling package. Not too dissimilar, but I don't think the way I procured that would have been truly sensational, let's say. So I'm sure you're going to be much better at it. Let's go from ground zero on this dry lining package. I'm your managing QS. Actually, screw that. I'm your commercial director.
Okay.
And I say to you, right, we've got this new project, dry lining package. You're coming in late. Procure the dry lining package for me. What is the first thing? I want you to talk to me through the best way you can procure it.
I always dived into the information firsthand. So spec, I'll be tearing into that. That'll be like one of my first things I start looking at. What's been requested. Going through the drawings and information is obviously is key. Your drawings, your architect drawings, structural drawings as well, but also you've got to think about your M&E drawings with M&E. With dry lining, sorry. And the reason is something that quite often gets overlooked is something like the number of access panels that's within a package. And you'll get that off the M&E drawings and they're not necessarily coordinated.
You're taking me back to the acoustic ceilings. There was loads and loads of access panels in the acoustic ceilings.
Yeah.
And I managed to procure it perfectly, as you can imagine.
Well done. Congrats. So yeah, that I'll be looking at like that information, trying to coordinate that, and then what does that look like in terms of a scope. Now, the best way to procure a dry lining package is with a fully detailed BOQ, but seldom did I actually have one on a project, nor had the time to put one together myself. So the next best solution is spec and drawings. So any subcontractors out there be rolling their eyes listening to this, because it's a pain to take off because there's lots of...
Well, so so much of a pain that you haven't got the time to do it, that you're passing it down. Two things before we move on. When I said to you, here's this dry lining package, go and procure it to the best of your ability, why were you drawn to the spec first?
So the spec, because I wanted to know if it's equal approved on certain elements. So equal approved, sometimes there's different nuances to it, but every QS will be rubbing their hands together when they see that, because they probably would have been priced at estimating stage as per spec, but equal approved gives you license to value engineer it for your own benefit. So I knew straight away I could make money out of this, and how's the best way to go about it.
And so the first thing you want to do, this shows why you were such a good QS. The first thing in your mind is, and mine would be different. I'd go to my scope as contractor first, see what my scope was and see how I can pass that down. But what you're saying is the first thing you would do is go and look at the spec, see if it was gypsum or whatever it was, Cineat, and then say, okay, it's X or equal approved, which means I can do what I want on this, or I'm stuck. It is, I have to go with X on this. What would happen? So if it's equal or approved, you're obviously thinking, yes, that gives me the flexibility, opens this up. Are there circumstances where it said product X is the product that we're going with, and you would still try and change that? Like, would you, as in, I actually did that, again, didn't expect the conversation to go this way, but with acoustic ceilings, we actually changed the product and it took ages, but it ended up being worthwhile. Is that something that you would do as well?
I've been known to push the envelope, Paul. So yeah, I would try it, definitely. I think for certain elements of buildings, you can push the envelope on it and say, look, there is like for like out there. That's the thing with something like, like window systems, they're very similar. There's like minor differences, and you can use a different product. There's not much change in them, but there could be a massive change in the cost. And yeah, it's something I did, and it helps you identify. I mean, once you've done this a few times, you realize where you're going to spend your time as a QS. So if something's heavily spec'd, like kitchen, whatever, just get it done. You're not going to make any money on that. Just get it done, go through the motions.
What do you mean, just get it done?
Well, if it's like kind of client spec'd, you just lock it in. It's going to be on a long lead-in time. There's going to be designs and like approval for that kind of element. Just get it procured. Make sure you've done your own due diligence on it, and make sure like the coordination's all sorted out. So do they need it offloading, etc.? You can go through that. Make sure that's rock solid, but don't waste your time on trying to make any money out of it.
But that's where kind of dry lining is a bit different, I guess.
Yeah.
Because if it's a kitchen, me as the client, I want this kitchen. I've chosen it. It was part of the interior design, part of the architecture. This is my dream. This is what I wanted. With the dry lining, I care a lot less, which is why I guess it's a dry lining package. First place I'm going is the spec, because I want to see.
You've got a license to do it. I mean, the client's only bothered about the Farrow and Ball paint they've got on the dry lining, at the end. So it is just really identifying those areas of where you can improve your position financially.
And then to that extent, therefore, there are certain packages, dry lining being one, where you would be tendering, doing your procurement with a view to, not only do I need to do my procurement here, but I need to do some client and architect and design team management, not manipulation, but I need to get this. How would you identify in the contract? It says X versus X or approved. How would you identify the process that you needed to go through? I'm your managing QS. I've just thrown you onto this job, and the first place you've gone is the spec, and you're looking at it and you go, right, I've got an opportunity here. What would your next steps be to actually go and get that changed to bring the value?
So then I'd be looking at who are our subcontract partners that I've delivered the scheme with, or who's in our supply chain, and try, get those guys together. And then I'd be putting together my tender documentation. I'd probably having a call with them anyway, saying, look, it's British gypsum or whatever, and say, look, I'm going to go, you can price it option A and option B, option A as per spec, and then option B will be your preferred alternative, because they can get better buying gains with maybe a different supplier or someone like that. So it's a benefit for everybody involved at that point. So you're buying them into that process, that you've got a secure tender coming out. You've got there's going to be an opportunity for them to make more money out of it as well, and use the systems that they prefer using. So you buy them into that process, and you've got this 3 to 4 or 5 maximum people that you're going to send it to, and then you put your tender documentation together then, so that'll incorporate, like I said, I would love a BOQ, but we didn't have them very often and I didn't have any time or resource to put one together. So your default is spec and drawings. So spec and drawings goes out, but what I would be listing out within that, I would be very explicit, line by line. I'm looking for this type of fire rated board. It needs to meet this specification. I need allow a provisional quantity for 60 access hatches to this fire rating or whatever. Yeah. So I'd be really explicit in what the requirements were. So that would help them, the guide, the subcontractor, on how to price and what I am looking for.
And talk to me about why you would. You've said I would do spec and drawings because the BOQ, I haven't got time for it. What? But best practice is BOQ. Why?
Because there's a lot of measuring involved, and you will no doubt come down to a remeasure or something, some argument about what was included, what wasn't, and it speeds up the returns, particularly like dry liners. Imagine them having to take off a whole job all the time, especially if the floors aren't repetitive. And they've got different layouts on different floors. It's a lot of work that the client really should be putting in to.
It's a net negative for the industry, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
What you're doing there, right? In that you could go as QS. You're saying you haven't got time for it, which I appreciate. You could go and do a BOQ, or spec and drawings means your 3 subbies go and do it. So it's 3 BOQs produced versus 1. And it then creates for you an environment where you have a much more difficult tender analysis. When you reflect on that, and you were unequivocal about it, I haven't got time for the BOQ. You haven't even done this for years, right? But you were still like, I haven't got time for the BOQ, so I'm going to go spec and drawings. That's what you did. Did it save you time overall?
Not having the BOQ?
Well, you basically said, I can't do it. BOQ, let's say it took you a day, right, to do the bill for the dry lining. And you said, I haven't got time for that. I'm going to send it out. When the tenders came back, and it maybe took longer for those tenders to come back, and it took you longer to do your analysis, on reflection, does it save you time?
I don't think it does save you time, but in terms of, is it your expertise? I'm not.
Do a bill.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in doing bills. I've put some
I always
together.
thought you were pretty good at measuring.
Yeah, I'm not too bad. But then there's different ways of measuring certain items. So like that's how it. There's different ways of how a subcontractor might measure it versus how you might measure it. And that's why you're better off getting someone who's adept at doing BOQs and documents and measuring that, and having a resource. I remember working with or knowing someone who worked at an organisation. They were largely spec and drawings, but they had budget to go and get bills of quantities put together for things like dry lining, things like that, because they want it absolutely rock solid, absolutely accurate, and speed up those returns because they were doing massive buildings. So it makes a lot of sense to do it for. I mean, it'd be great to do it for all buildings and all packages, but some people are actually noticing if we did it for these packages, we could really, really help our team and the industry generally.
And so, best practice wise, you think dry lining should have a bill?
Because it's complicated to take off. It's more arduous than a lot of other items.
And therefore, then, and this talks to, I guess, some of the problems that we have as an industry generally, right? Because you're saying, me as QS, I'm doing the procurement on this. I don't have the skill to do the bill. Right? I might as well give it to the 3 specialists. The 3 specialists do it. I guess they're all within like a margin of error, but they're all slightly different, right? And then it's a bit like I said it to you on one of the last shows that we were on, right? Where as the specialist, so as the curtain walling specialist, if someone said to me, you tell me what it is because I don't have that specialism, there is a bit of an art, isn't there, to creating, what's the word? Creating an environment where you can generate more revenue from that fact. So it's funny, isn't it, that is the feeling that you would have had as QS. I haven't got the time for this, but it's actually wrapping up quite a few other
facets to it.
Yeah,
yeah. It's like I could do it, but I'm not going to be efficient at it, and I might make an error.
Yeah,
and all these other things. And what main contractors should be doing really is giving their QS teams a budget to go and outsource a BOQ for certain packages. And that's the best way I would see around it.
It's funny because you've been quite honest there about why you personally wouldn't do one. Like, it's not your skill set. A lot of people will say to me, and I hear it all the time, and we've talked about it on this show a lot, I wouldn't do a bill because I'm not taking responsibility for that measure. And I've always thought it's such a, I want to say, it's bullshit, isn't it? Right? Like, you don't want to do the bill for the reasons that you've just outlined, actually, right? Haven't got the time, haven't got the expertise. This risk thing, there is a component of that, which is true. But almost all of those companies where they say, I don't want to do a bill because I don't want to take the risk, will be procuring subcontractors on fixed price, lump sum. So it's not an issue anyway, right? Because you've contracted them on that basis. So I am a huge advocate for doing the bill and creating an environment where you're doing one bill, not the three with the subbies, and they're having all the challenges of building it. And then if you're the main contractor or the lead procuring company, just say fixed price lump sum, and you've got rid of all of that risk anyway, which is no doubt what they would do anyway. So, okay, going back to best practice, we've got the contractors that we want. We've created the tender document. What's your process from here?
So calling them all before, just let them know it's coming out. So it's not like it's just landed in their inbox. So quick courtesy call, give them just a quick overview and say, look, I'm going to send this out. Do you want to meet on site next week or the week after? So they can come and visit the site and meet up, go through any kind of queries they might have, a bit better to address it in person.
Yeah.
And genuinely get their engagement really of the scheme. Are they interested? Do they want it? Does it suit them?
Yeah.
Etc. So, if they don't turn up to a site visit, they're probably not going to return a price for you, or they're not going to put that as much effort.
They're not worth your time, are they?
Yeah.
They're
and
not that interesting.
It works both ways. I always advise subcontractors to do the same with main contractors, is go and meet them if they're interested in you above price, and they'll be willing.
And if they're interested in best practice, they're gonna be there, aren't they?
So yeah, so that would be the phase. So then you'd I'd cringe, but yeah, you have to email it out. So it gets probably lost in someone's junk mail or something like that, and they've got to open up the information, etc. I would then be really like pushing for that meeting, and I try and block a site visit out that for a day, and then try and meet those subcontractors all on the same day at some point.
Yeah.
Hopefully not too close so they're overlapping with each other, which has happened a few times. But try and space it out and meet 3 of those contractors that day, go through it. Check the attendances list. What are you going to supply? What are they going to supply?
With them in person.
Yeah.
So you've created the tender doc.
Yeah.
You've issued it to them. You've invited them to site.
Mm-hmm.
Are you walking around the site with them and saying...
Yeah, we worked on like a lot of fit outs and stuff. So existing buildings that are hundreds of years old in London. So the buildings were there, and you don't necessarily have that with new builds, but you still show them the site, the access. You go and grab a coffee with them and just take, this is where, you can unload here. We might have
emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could.
Where the hell is the bill? What is this special drawings nonsense for the last time? I'm not going to do this again, Chris.
I know that. So you could have like you might have an access lift on the side of the building. It's going to help with deliveries, and you just go through those bits. It might only be a half-hour conversation, but at least you've met, you've broke bread together, as the Italians say, and you take it forward from there, and then say, look. The return date is also really communicating that date you need it returned by, and they might be saying, "Oh, can I have an extra few days because of this, and this?" And you'd be receptive to that as a QS if someone's asked you in person when they've met.
Because you're always narrowing their deadlines so you can hit yours. But you've hit on an interesting point now, and so I'm the lead surveyor. I'm the commercial director on this particular project. I was trying to hand it over to you, and I've just been given by the architect Rev 2 information, right? And you've just yesterday done all of your site visits and met all the guys, gone away, you've kind of started to agree the attendances. You're narrowing your scope, I imagine, right? Actually, I'm not going to give them X, I'm going to give them Y. And you're thinking about changing it. I then come and say, right, there's a load more information here now. How do you manage that?
Ooh. Tender addendum. God, didn't like them, because you've got to manage it in two ways, haven't you? Because there might be a variation or change you've got to manage. And how do you capture that change, that variation within the new set of information that you've sent them? So there's always that grey area when that comes around. So
you're worried, sorry, just so we're clear, you're worried about, because we're midway through the project on this dry lining package, right? You're worried not just about how do I make sure I get all the information so there's no variations down the line, but actually I've gone from Rev 0 to Rev 1 with my client and there is a variation. How am I going to get that priced while at the same time down the line
procure it as well at the same time? And it's also just making sure you can track that change has happened, because it could just get captured. The subcontractor prices it. I know you could go back to rates and kind of prorata it, but it might just skirt around a couple of things that you might not have picked up.
Absolutely.
During that process. So that is a consideration. But doing a tender addendum again is almost like doing another tender again. It's the same process. You still need to review the information, identify if there's any key changes to them, rather than just dumping it on them for them to assess.
And is there any environment where you don't I don't come to you the day after that meeting with all you guys on site and say there's a load of new information that's gone from Rev 0 to Rev 1. That doesn't happen. But you come away from those 3 or 4 meetings, someone has said 3 things that have really resonated, another specialist has said 2 things that really resonate, and the other one hasn't really said anything. But you think, oh, those 5 points, I want to clarify that in my tender, where you actually come away from those mid-tender meetings and you issue a tender addendum anyway, saying I want you to include for X, Y, and Z, or I'm no longer going to give you the hoist, you can use cradle, or is it like, how would you manage? Is there anything to learn from the mid-tender, the site visit, that you then regurgitate and make sure that the subbies get that before you're actually...
Yeah, I wouldn't label that as a mid-tender necessarily, that site visit straight away. It's more of a kind of cursory, let's go and check out the site, that you can build mid-tenders into, particularly if it's like worth high value and there's lots of specification and systems that are required. Like for something like M&E, you would definitely dive into like a mid-tender and make sure they've allowed for everything. But you do find when you meet the subcontractors on site, they might have different questions, and you're like, oh, actually, can you allow for this? You know, like in the follow-up. So you're right about that information you might get from contractor A. Is contractor B thinking about it in C or D, whatever? So you do have to feed that in at some point. And where you fit that in is also tricky. It's like maybe an email. Is it a phone call? Is it a text? Is it? Yeah,
it's got to be. At least in my opinion, it's got to be relatively formalised, because if it's an email, a text, or a phone call,
gets lost. Where
does that go? And what's the audit trail?
If it was something to do with attendances wise, you'd just update your attendance list to make it clear.
But that's almost kind of what I was thinking. Like maybe those. Yeah, maybe you're right. The site visit isn't the moment. Maybe a mid-tender is, but you would update the schedule of attendances or whatever to reflect those conversations.
If you're down the line as well and you're doing pre-let meetings with, say, 2 contractors, you've got 2 favourites that are in the running, and there's differences between their offer, like slightly, and you think, well, and you can communicate this through like the meeting minutes and stuff like this, discuss actually, can you price up this, and this? And then you can take that forward as like a small price change or whatever that looks like, almost like a variation, but extra override included in the contract. And that's how I would deal with that in a smaller scale operation.
Got you. Okay, so
also we missed tender return periods.
Okay,
got to give subcontractors, particularly on something that's complicated, 4 weeks. Like unless you've got a BOQ, and even if it is a BOQ,
you've never got one, mate.
Yeah, I never got one, but I always gave decent time periods to return, so I was always on top.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I was speaking to someone yesterday, who was saying my tender return periods aren't that bad, right? And so they were showing me, and this was a relatively small project, right? But it was actually a dry lining package, and I think one of them was M&E. And on the M&E, he'd given 3 weeks. On the dry lining, he'd given 2, which to my mind probably isn't that bad. It's not overly generous, but it's not horrific either, right? But the challenge he had, and again, I think this was six or 7 flats, but was that the M&E return date was, let's call it, the 1st of July, and the start on site date was the 20th of July. And I said, that in itself is a problem, right? Not only as a reflection for the specialist, right? They look at that and think, hang on a minute. This job doesn't feel like this job is well run if that's the case, right? Is that what you...
Yeah. I didn't have people starting necessarily. I might not have placed the order right up until like a couple of weeks out but we would have been negotiating well in advance, communicating that, but you shouldn't be tendering with people who need to start in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, so what we've discussed in the first half of the show is a pretty rock solid analog version of the tendering and procurement process. What we'll do in the second half is talk about how that could change, how that could be improved, how it could be bettered digitally. We'll do that, mate, after this break.
Looking forward to it.
So, second half of the show, I'm going to do something that I hadn't intended to do. Don't worry. And actually almost press repeat. I'm going to ask you that exact same question that I asked you before. But I'm going to ask you it in the context of you now have a different way of working. So you just joined this company where I'm the managing QS, the commercial director, the commercial lead, let's say. And I've just said to you, right, there's this project that you're going on and I need you to procure the dry lining, mate. And by the way, we do all of our procurement digitally now. So don't use Word, we don't use Excel. Everything is digital.
I'm very happy now.
I'm
very happy.
Is that why you joined? Oh, okay. I thought it was because I was such a charming interviewer. So I'm going to say to you, right, and I want you to imagine we're in a future world where the world is different. Say to you, right, dry lining package. I've done everything up to this point, but you take on the job now. What to you about the best practice? You just described to me, I think it was half an hour, that first half. I never thought I'd talk about dry lining so much. You just described to me your best practice for procuring that dry lining package in the old world. This is the new world with this digital tendering. How are you going to do things differently?
Well, for a start, there's a centralised process that we're going to go through, so I'm pretty excited. I like standardisation.
Yeah.
So what technology won't replace is some of the human elements that we need to do. So that site visit, picking up the phone to the subcontractors as well. You still got to do those things, and your technology will never replace that. And also reviewing your scopes as well with the advancements of AI that are coming. You could potentially analyze scopes and say, look, we can suggest an alternative or suggest or pull out a...
But the first thing you said to me you were going to do was you were going to go to your spec.
Yeah, and I'd still do that.
Yeah,
I still need to know how much time and energy I'm going to spend on this, trying to value engineer it and make money out of it. So I need to know that straight away. Yeah. And what I'm going to ask the subcontractor to do. But so with this centralized system that we've got, we're going to have a bank of scope of works that I can dive straight into and pull out a relative spec for a very similar building that's been worked on, built upon within the company. So it'd be a matter of me not having to worry about, I've forgot about access hatches. It'd be a matter of access hatches are written already in this scope that I've got.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, isn't it? Because you smugly said to me at the start of the first half, loads of people forget about access hatches, and I reflected on my own experience of procuring that acoustic ceiling. I probably did forget to do the access hatches because procuring dry lining wasn't something that I regularly did. But therein lies the problem, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If my company had flagged almost X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C being access hatches, are you thinking about them? Because it also talks to that point that you eloquently put about the BOQ, where I'm no expert in dry lining. And you've just kind of proven that you're more of an expert in dry lining than I am, because you know you're not going to do that. But why are the tools of the company not telling me all of the issues that I should be thinking about? And that's kind of what you're talking about with the scope of works. How do you picture that working?
So, having a standard set that would highlight things that you need to be considering for projects, and then you could have them tailored. So some commercial buildings might have more fire rated and acoustic requirements versus a residential building or a house or something like that. So you could almost have like tailored specs for these things that are then highlighting to the QS that you need to consider this, you need to review it. What is your specification saying? Because it could say, as per specification ref whatever, K something. Is that right? It's K, isn't it?
For dry lining, I only know H, mate.
I think it's K. Anyway, I've probably got it wrong. But then, or probably for acoustics might be Q, is it? I can't remember. But anyway,
you've let yourself down.
It could have that. So then you've got to go and investigate your scope of works. Oh, I need to think about that. I need to put that in. And it's got a fire rated thing. I need to think about that. Where do we find that? And then you're drawing the attention to go and review it. You understand it. You've built a greater understanding of how to build a scope together as well, and then you can take that forward into every project.
A lot of people have said to me about digital transformation, technology adoption. Well, if you tell people how to do their jobs through automation and then X, Y, and Z, you're going to end up with a suite of QSs, like a generation of QSs or project managers or estimators who don't know what they're doing. And my argument to that talks to the points that you've just kind of taught through, which is actually in our fictional company, I'm the managing QS, there's an ops director, there's whoever else, and they've procured hundreds of dry lining packages. You haven't, right? I hadn't, but when I was on Battersea Power Station, and that meant I didn't put the access panels in, right? You put the access panels in, but someone with more knowledge of dry lining above you would put in access panels and X and Y and Z. And actually what technology can do is flag for you those issues, right? So that actually you can learn much more quickly. I could go and procure that Battersea Power Station was a great job, don't get me wrong. But I could have procured that and saved 10 grand or probably whatever it was. You could have procured projects X, Y, and Z with a bit more. There's no central hub though, is there?
Yeah,
ever.
I think construction's always lacked that, hasn't it? Really, even from our days at university, trying to access a central hub of information was challenging at the time. Before Sealant came over and his.
But there's always that. Sorry to interrupt you. There's always that excuse in our industry, isn't there? Yeah, every project's different. It's fragmented. No project's the same. Like you start fresh on it's not true. You do start fresh on every project. Every project is unique, but only to some level.
Yeah.
Like it rhymes, doesn't it? The problem on project B is quite similar to project A. And the reason you like I said, I'm being a bit facetious here. You smugly said before we started this, I've got something that people often forget in dry lining, right? Access panels. That's only because you did project A, that by the time you were on project B, you knew. Why? So as main contractors or any procuring business, we're leaving loads of money on the table, aren't we? Because we're not sharing the experience of those senior people who have been through it with the rest of the team.
Yeah, and your financial reporting's all knackered, isn't it? Because you're reporting to your boss, I've made 10 grand on here, but you've missed 10 grand in access panels. So everything's skewed. The business is not performing as well as they're forecasting. So there's a huge element there that you're not just thinking about, it's costing me more money. It's like your reporting's all out. Your business is forecasting completely incorrectly, and that has long-term effects too.
And so mid-tender, Mid-tender or site review, I know you're saying site visit, sorry. I know you're saying that they're two different things, which I accept. But if we bundle them together for the moment, what is different to your approach to that mid-tender or site visits with a digital tool? How does it differ versus the current way of working?
I think if anything's picked up in between those meetings, you can then communicate it digitally through the app.
Via text or something like you said?
Yeah, via WhatsApp. But you could communicate it and then have it officially logged. Like when you said, "Oh, that'll go into the ether, won't it?" And that's true. It does. A lot of things that get, "Oh, can you supply this or can you do that?" just gets missed, right?
Yeah.
So having it centralized in one place, all the comms, you've got that audit trail straight away of what was agreed
For every subcontractor?
Yeah, for every subcontractor, for every package. And then when it does come down, it's like, "Oh, I never said that." And he's like, "Well, you did. And we've agreed it. We agreed it here. We had it in your meeting minutes too. And we had it in your order." So, it's not that I've just plucked it in and just dropped it in there.
I think that's one of the most powerful things, right? Because for me, when you're procuring a big package, and it could take 3 months to procure a massive package, right? And you go through a couple of iterations of your tender, a couple of iterations of your quote. You dread that process of putting together the contract, don't you? Because you think, right, how do I best do this? Do I completely change the scope that I wrote initially or in the tender addendum to include A, B, and C that we've now agreed? Or do I append all the emails, and I've got to find all the emails and make sure that they're all there? Or do I append the meeting minutes? How do I give them like the order of precedence? Have I remembered to get everything there? Was that subcontractor A who included that, or was it subcontractor B? And I think that is one of the main points about digital tendering versus analog tendering. And with analog tendering, if you're my QS and you've procured that dry lining package and you go on holiday for 2 weeks, you probably go to the Caribbean or something like you usually do. And I think actually I need to place that order, don't I? Where's your email? Where is it on the server? I can't do it without you, can I?
No.
I can't even really progress it because I don't know where you're at. So again, hauling it all back into one space has a profound impact, doesn't it?
Yeah, from a risk perspective and just time. Remember having to print emails and then save them on the server and then create a folder for them. No one wants to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've talked a little bit about some of the challenges that I know contractors have with adopting this change. I mean, there's people think that it's like digital tech. And when we're talking digital tendering, we're obviously talking about ceilings to some extent, right? Bless you. And like how that can change things. Subbies can't use tech is what I hear. I build relationships with people in person, not digitally. There's so many different things. The way I work is absolutely fine. And the way you described working in part 1 of this show, I think you'd done a really good job of procuring that package. But the way you would do it in part 2 would just be a cut above. And you'd probably narrow like the non-recoverables gap because you've got the scope of works, library. Someone above you has said, think about X, Y, and Z. So you've thought about X, Y, and Z. They've been flagged to you. You've then logged all the information into one space. So then when you're pulling together the contract document, you're actually getting the entire log, as opposed to, God, where did I put that email? Did they say that or did they not say that? So there's so many reasons why you should do it. When you talk to people about change, and digital transformation is a bit of a cheesy term, but let's roll with digital transformation for QSs. What do you hear as like a rebuttal, if you like? Like, what are the challenges that these companies have to overcome to transform?
So I think obviously the status quo is always worked. I always feel like commercial teams have been thought of last. So smallest violin for QSs, but
We've got that out a few times.
Yeah, we do get it out regularly. But
episode 178. This is the 176th time that we've got it out.
But they're thought of last because the kind of tech stack and how they push risk around, it's kind of worked, but they're not seeing a bigger picture and how they can actually improve their margin.
I think it's definitely worked, right?
Yeah.
I think it's unfair to say it's kind of I completely hear what you're saying.
Mm.
These companies, all of these projects that we've ever built have been delivered, right? And lots of them have made money. There's lots of companies that have built great businesses, right? But could it be better?
100%, yeah. I think what we kind of missed with what we were just talking about was the speed. So I still got to do the site visit and do my review and stuff like that. That's going to take time. It's always going to take the same amount of time, more or less. But the bits in between, I could halve, maybe even get it down to 75% reduction. Like that means I'm going to buy back so much more of my time. So then the next package comes along and I'm like, oh, do I need to spend that much time on that to value engineer it? Or can I go and build a strong relationship with a client? Or can I go and do this with the subcontractor? It allows me more time to do that. Can I spend more time on my variations for upstream to the client? That's the time that you buy back, and that's where you can use it more productively and efficiently. So connecting all those dots and really kind of in one app, and then really reducing that down will just buy back so much time. That you times that out by all the packages you're doing that you would do manually. You're saving weeks on a project. Mm-hmm. And what the classic is, oh, Chris, how many packages you got left on there? Can you help so-and-so on their job do this package? And you're like, well, all right, if he needs help kind of thing. But so you're trying to stretch different QS's resource onto different projects and not effectively. And what the tech will do, it will enable you to scale that out effectively, efficiently, accurately, and actually keep an actual track of what people are doing and how they're procuring.
No brainer, are you saying?
Absolutely.
And final question. So we've talked about analog, we've talked about digital. Just describe to me what you think construction procurement would look like in 2030, for instance. Are we going to have a bill with every? You've just told me how much time you've got left, right? You've got left over because of all these benefits. So, how's it going to look?
Yeah, I think it's funny you play on that because I think everyone will have a bill. I think the technology you'll get from design that's going to come from there, that it'll be so easy to generate bills of quantities. So it'll be so highly measured. I can see the industry is going to become, because there's no reason why it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So I can really see tech having a big impact there. And then also, I think companies are going to start having real market intelligence that they can rely on. Whereas now they might have to dig out an old quotation from an old file or another project that happened to try and match up rates. Are these right, etc. Getting that market intelligence. I feel you're going to have real-time in business intelligence as a company, not just main contractors, but subcontractors. And then subcontractors are going to be more efficient in their pricing. They're going to know the rates more closely. They're going to be able to price jobs quickly because they've got bills of quantities, they've got the intelligence, they've got the systems. And subcontractors are going to be more upskilled in technology than they are today. And I'm going to see it being a much more dramatically reduced procurement time for everything. That's how I look at it in the future.
Yeah, because that's really interesting. One of the things I want to, as you were talking there, I was thinking we're talking about main contracting here, right? And actually the impact for the main contractor is they centralise everything, they save a lot of time. In doing that, they free themselves up to do a lot of other things for the subcontractors, right? To make the subcontractor experience better and richer, whether that's the bill, whether that's the site visits, whatever that is. So you've got the main contractor having a better experience, subcontractor having a better experience, and in turn, the other stakeholders, the client and everyone else within the project gets a better project. And that's where you think we're going to be.
Yeah, solved it.
Yeah. I mean, probably time to go to the pub, isn't it? I mean, there's not a huge amount else to say. I think we've covered best practice, analog. We've talked about what can be done digitally. You will be back on the show if he comes back again. I mean, he skipped one, which we were very upset about. You'll be back on the show in a few weeks. Thanks for coming on the show, mate, and I'll speak to you soon.
Cheers. See you soon, mate.